I found my front door wide open when I got home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in September, and my first thought was that someone had broken into my house in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. My heart pounded as I stepped through the doorway, half expecting to find my living room ransacked and my television gone. Instead, everything looked normal except for one glaring absence. The large cardboard box that had been sitting on my porch when I left for work that morning was nowhere to be found. I stepped back outside and looked around the porch, thinking maybe the delivery driver had moved it or the wind had knocked it over. Nothing. I checked behind the potted plants around the side of the house, even in my backyard. The package had simply vanished. This was not just any package either. It was a custom gaming computer I had been waiting 3 months for, worth nearly $4,000. I had specifically taken a late lunch to come home and bring it inside, but my boss had called me back early for an emergency meeting. I figured it would be fine for a few hours since my neighborhood in the Sonoran Hills subdivision was generally safe. My name is Frank Voss, and I had lived in this cookie-cutter community for almost 5 years. The houses all looked similar, with their beige stucco exteriors and terracotta tile roofs, arranged in neat rows with manicured lawns that the HOA insisted we maintain according to their exacting standards. I was a software engineer working for a tech company downtown, 32 years old, single and generally kept to myself. I paid my bills on time, mowed my lawn every week, and never caused any trouble. The last thing I expected was for someone to steal a package right off my porch in broad daylight. I pulled out my phone and called the delivery company first. After 20 minutes on hold, a representative confirmed that the package had been delivered and signed for at 2:15 that afternoon. Signed for? I had not signed for anything. I asked who had signed, and after some clicking on their end, they told me the signature just said HOA. My blood ran cold. The Homeowners Association had taken my package. I immediately called the HOA office number, but it went straight to voicemail. The message was in the clipped, nasal voice of Deborah Kensington, the HOA president, informing me that office hours were Monday through Friday, 9 to 4, and to leave a message if it was urgent. I glanced at my watch. It was 4:30. I left a message anyway, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. I explained that a package had been delivered to my home and apparently signed for by someone from the HOA, and I needed it returned immediately. I gave my address, my phone number, and hung up feeling increasingly agitated. Who did they think they were, taking packages off people's porches? The next morning, I called the HOA office at exactly 9 o'clock. Deborah answered on the third ring with a board. Sonoran Hills HOA, this is Deborah. Hi Deborah, this is Frank Voss from 4782 Desert Willow Drive. I left you a message yesterday about a package that was taken from my porch. I need it back immediately. There was a pause, then I heard papers shuffling. Oh yes, Mr. Voss, I have your package here in the office. However, you cannot have it back until you pay your outstanding HOA dues. I felt my jaw drop. Excuse me. What are you talking about? My dues are automatically deducted from my bank account every month. According to our records, you are 3 months behind on your dues, Deborah said, her tone suggesting she dealt with deadbeats like me every day. That is $300 you owe, plus late fees of $15 per month, bringing your total to $345. Once you pay that, you can have your package. There has to be a mistake, I insisted. I have never missed a payment. Can you check again? I have checked, Mr. Voss. Our records are very thorough. You can come to the office and review them if you like, but the fact remains that you owe this money, and we are well within our rights to hold your property until the debt is settled. You cannot just take people's packages. That is theft. Deborah's voice turned icy. It is not theft, Mr. Voss. It is a lien enforcement. According to Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your property, the association has the right to place liens on properties with outstanding debts and to take reasonable measures to collect those debts. This is a reasonable measure. Holding my $4,000 computer hostage is not reasonable. I want it back now, or I am calling the police. Go ahead and call them, Deborah said dismissively. They will tell you this is a civil matter. Pay your dues, Mr. Voss, and you can have your toy back. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. This could not be happening. I immediately logged into my bank account online and pulled up my transaction history. Every month for the past 5 years, like clockwork, there was an automatic payment of $100 to Sonoran Hills HOA. Every single month, including the last 3. I took screenshots of everything and printed them out. Then I called the police non-emergency line. The dispatcher listened to my story, and just as Deborah had predicted, told me it sounded like a civil dispute and that I should consult with an attorney. They could send an officer to file a report if I wanted, but they could not force the HOA to return my property without a court order. I asked them to send an officer anyway. If nothing else, I wanted this documented. Officer Martinez arrived about 45 minutes later, a tired-looking man in his 40s who had clearly dealt with HOA disputes before. He took my statement, looked at my bank records, and shook his head. HOAs in Arizona have a lot of power, he said. Sometimes more than they should, but your bank statements clearly show you have been paying. This looks like either an error on their part or something more deliberate. Can you get my package back? I asked. Not without a court order. But I can go talk to them if you want. Sometimes that helps. We drove separately to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the subdivision entrance. Deborah was behind the desk, and her expression soured the moment she saw me walk in with Officer Martinez. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA president. A woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair that looked like she had it trimmed into a bob at an expensive salon every 2 weeks, wearing a cardigan despite the 90-degree heat outside, and an expression that suggested she had been sucking on a lemon. Officer, how can I help you? She asked, ignoring me completely. Madam, I am here about Mr. Voss's package. He has bank records showing he has paid his dues every month. Can we clear this up? Deborah pulled out a thick ledger and turned it around to show us. This is our record of payments. As you can see, Mr. Voss has not paid since June. I leaned over to look. Sure enough, next to my address, the last 3 months showed unpaid in red ink, but I knew for a fact I had paid. Your records are wrong, I said. My bank statements prove it. Bank statements can be falsified, Deborah said with a sniff. Are you seriously suggesting I created fake bank statements? I was almost shouting now. Officer Martinez held up a hand. Madam, these look like legitimate bank records to me. Is it possible there was an error in your bookkeeping? Our bookkeeping is impeccable, Deborah insisted. If Mr. Voss's bank shows payments were made, perhaps they were never received. That is between him and his bank. It is not our responsibility to chase down missing payments. But I set up automatic payments through your system 5 years ago. You process them electronically. Then perhaps you should check with your bank about why the payments are not going through. Deborah folded her arms across her chest. Until we receive payment, the package stays here. Officer Martinez looked at me apologetically. Like I said, this is a civil matter. You are going to need to either pay them or get a lawyer involved. I am not paying them money I do not owe, I said firmly. I will get a lawyer." As we left the office, I could feel Deborah's satisfied gaze burning into my back. This was not about the money for her. She was enjoying this. I spent the rest of the day calling lawyers. The first 3 I contacted did not handle HOA disputes. The fourth, a small practice specializing in property law, agreed to meet with me the next day. His name was Roger Chen, and his office was in a strip mall in Tempe, sandwiched between a nail salon and a faux restaurant. Roger was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with sharp eyes and a quick manner of speaking. He listened to my story, examined my bank statements, and nodded along. "HOAs pull this kind of thing more often than you would think," he said. "The laws in Arizona give them a lot of power, but they are not above the law. Taking your package without your consent is theft, plain and simple. They can put a lien on your property for unpaid dues, but they cannot just confiscate your personal belongings." "So what do we do?" I asked. "First, we send them a demand letter. We give them 5 business days to return your property. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit for theft, conversion of property, and emotional distress. The fact that you have clear bank records showing you paid makes this a pretty straightforward case." "How much is this going to cost me?" Roger quoted me his hourly rate, which made me wince, but I did not have much choice. That computer had all my work files on it, plus it represented months of saving. I was not about to let Deborah Kensington steal it from me. I signed the retainer agreement, and Roger got to work. The demand letter went out that afternoon via certified mail. In it, Roger laid out the facts. I had paid my HOA dues every month for 5 years. I had bank records to prove it, and the HOA had unlawfully taken my property. They had 5 business days to return it, or we would pursue legal action including criminal charges for theft. 3 days later, I received a response. Not from Deborah, but from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gerald Pritchard from a firm called Pritchard and Associates. His letter was full of legal jargon, but the gist was that the HOA maintained I owed dues, that they had acted within their authority as outlined in the bylaws, and that if I pursued legal action, they would countersue for harassment and legal fees. Roger read the letter and actually laughed. "They are bluffing, and they are wrong. Let us file the lawsuit." We filed in Maricopa County Superior Court the following week. The lawsuit named both the HOA and Deborah Kensington personally as defendants. We sued for the return of my property, for the $4,000 the computer was worth, for emotional distress, and for punitive damages. Roger explained that under Arizona law, if someone takes your property knowing they have no right to it, you can sue for up to 3 times the value of the property. "We are going for $12,000, plus whatever the computer is worth if they have damaged it," Roger said. "And we are going to win." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and depositions. Deborah and the HOA board were forced to turn over all their financial records, which Roger subpoenaed. What he found was damning. My automatic payments had been going through just fine, hitting the HOA's bank account every month. But someone, and the records suggested it was Deborah herself, had been manually marking them as unpaid in the HOA's ledger. Not just mine either. 4 other homeowners in the subdivision had the same thing happening to them. When Roger showed me the evidence, I felt sick. "Why would she do this?" "Control," Roger said simply. "Some people get a little power and it goes to their head. She probably thought she could force you to pay twice, or at minimum make your life difficult. What she did not count on was you having good records and being willing to fight back." We also discovered that my package was being stored in Deborah's personal office, which she kept locked. When Roger requested to inspect it to verify it had not been damaged, Deborah's attorney fought the motion, which only made them look worse. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Flores, ordered the package to be turned over to the court for safekeeping until the trial concluded. When I finally got my computer back, 2 months after it had been taken, I was relieved to find it was still sealed in its original packaging. At least Deborah had not opened it or used it. Small mercies. The trial date was set for January, 4 months after the package had been taken. In the meantime, word had spread through the neighborhood about what was happening. The other 4 homeowners whose payments had been marked as unpaid came forward and joined a class action lawsuit that Roger helped them file. Suddenly, Deborah and the HOA board were facing multiple lawsuits, and the local news picked up the story. A reporter from Channel 12 News showed up at my door one evening in November. Her name was Jessica Torres, and she wanted to interview me about the case. I was hesitant at first, but Roger said it might help. I agreed, and the segment aired 2 days later during the evening news. Watching myself on television was surreal, but the story was fair and made Deborah look as bad as she deserved. The day after the news segment aired, I got a call from Gerald Pritchard, the HOA's attorney. He wanted to settle. The HOA would pay me $2,000 and drop all counterclaims if I agreed to drop the lawsuit. I told him I would think about it and called Roger. $2,000 is not even what the computer cost, Roger said. Tell them no. We are going to trial. I called Pritchard back and declined the offer. He sounded annoyed but not surprised. As the trial date approached, I could feel the tension in the neighborhood. Some of my neighbors avoided me, probably afraid of angering the HOA. Others quietly thanked me for standing up to Deborah. One older man, a retiree named Bill who lived 3 houses down, stopped me while I was checking my mail one day. "I hope you nail her," he said. "She has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Someone needed to stand up to her." "You could testify," I suggested. "Tell the judge about the other things she has done." Bill shook his head. "I am too old to get involved in lawsuits, but I will be cheering for you from the sidelines." I understood. Not everyone had the time, money, or energy to fight. But I did, and I was not backing down. The trial began on a cold January morning. Arizona does not get truly cold in the winter, but it was chilly enough that I wore a jacket to court. Judge Flores presided, and the courtroom was surprisingly full. Several of my neighbors had shown up, along with the other homeowners involved in the class action suit, and even Jessica Torres from Channel 12. Roger made our opening statement, laying out the facts clearly and methodically. I had paid my dues. The HOA had received the payments. Deborah had marked them as unpaid. The HOA had taken my property without permission. Under Arizona law, this was theft. We were seeking the return of my property, which had already happened, plus triple damages for the value of the property, as allowed under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 12691, which allows for treble damages in cases of theft or conversion. Gerald Pritchard made the HOA's opening statement, arguing that this was all a misunderstanding, that the HOA had acted in good faith based on their records, and that Deborah was a volunteer who had dedicated years of service to the community and did not deserve to be vilified. Judge Flores listened to both sides without expression, then called the first witness. Roger called me to the stand first. I testified about coming home to find my package missing, about calling the HOA and being told I owed money I did not owe, and about the months of stress and frustration that followed. I showed the judge my bank statements, walking through each payment line by line. Pritchard cross-examined me, trying to suggest that maybe I had made a mistake, Maybe the payments had not gone through. Maybe I was confused about the dates. But my records were airtight, and I could see the judge was not buying his arguments. Next, Roger called a representative from my bank, who testified that the automatic payments had been processed successfully every month, and that the HOA's account had received the funds. Pritchard tried to argue that maybe the money had been lost somewhere between the bank and the HOA's ledger, but the bank representative shut that down quickly. Electronic transfers either go through or they do not. There is no in-between. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Roger called Deborah Kensington to the stand. Deborah walked up to the witness stand like she was heading to a firing squad, her face pale but her jaw set in defiance. She wore a navy blue dress suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and clutched her purse like it was a shield. Roger started gently, asking her about her role as HOA president, how long she had been in the position, what her responsibilities were. Deborah answered in clipped, cautious sentences, clearly coached by her attorney to say as little as possible. Then Roger pulled out the HOA's ledger and the bank records. He asked Deborah to explain why the ledger showed I had not paid when the bank records showed I had. Deborah hesitated, her eyes darting to Pritchard, who nodded for her to answer. "There must have been an error in data entry," Deborah said stiffly. "An error," Roger repeated. "Can you explain how this error occurred? I cannot recall the specific circumstances." "You cannot recall, but you are the one who maintains the ledger, correct?" "I am." "And you are the one who marked Mr. Voss's payments as unpaid." Deborah hesitated again. "Yes, but I was going off the information I had at the time." "What information was that?" "Because the bank statements show the payments were made." "I did not have access to the bank statements when I was updating the ledger." Roger looked incredulous. "You did not check the bank statements before marking payments as unpaid." "I checked our internal records." "And where do your internal records come from?" "From the bank." "So you did have access to the bank statements." Deborah's face flushed. "I mean eventually, but not always right away." Roger let that hang in the air for a moment, then he pulled out another document. "Miss Kensington, this is a bank statement from July showing that Mr. Voss's payment was received on July 5th. This is your ledger entry from July 8th showing his payment marked as unpaid. Can you explain that?" Deborah stared at the documents, her mouth opening and closing. "I must have made a mistake, and in August, another mistake, yes, and September, yes, 3 mistakes in a row, all involving the same homeowner." Roger's tone was measured but devastating. "And what about these other homeowners?" He pulled out more documents, showing the same pattern for 4 other residents. Deborah's composure was cracking. "I do not know. Maybe there was a glitch in the system. A glitch that only affected 5 specific homeowners. Miss Kensington, is not it true that you deliberately marked these payments as unpaid?" "No." Deborah's voice rose. "Why would I do that?" "That is an excellent question. Why would you? Was it for money? Were you hoping these homeowners would pay twice?" Objection. Pritchard was on his feet. "Speculation." "Withdrawn," Roger said smoothly. He had made his point. "Miss Kensington, when Mr. Voss's package was delivered, who signed for it?" "I did." "And why did you sign for a package addressed to Mr. Voss?" "I saw the delivery truck on my rounds through the neighborhood. I noticed that Mr. Voss had an outstanding balance, so I thought it would be appropriate to hold the package until he paid." "You thought it would be appropriate to take someone else's property?" "I was not taking it. I was holding it, without his permission. He owed money. Money he had already paid, according to the bank records." Roger let that sink in. "Miss Kensington, did you ever check the bank statements before taking Mr. Voss's package?" Deborah was silent for a long moment. "No," she finally admitted. "So you took a $4,000 computer from his porch based on incorrect information in your ledger, information that you had entered incorrectly." "I made a mistake that cost Mr. Voss months of stress, legal fees, and the use of his property. A mistake that you refused to correct even when he showed you his bank statements." Deborah had no answer to that. She sat there, her hands trembling, looking like she wanted to disappear. Judge Flores watched her with an expression that could have frozen lava. Pritchard's redirect was weak, mostly trying to emphasize that Deborah had not intended to harm anyone, and that she had been acting in what she believed were the HOA's best interests. But the damage was done. The rest of the trial was anticlimactic. Roger called a few more witnesses, including one of the other affected homeowners, who testified about how Deborah had tried the same thing with her. Pritchard called a couple of HOA board members who tried to defend Deborah, saying she was a dedicated volunteer who worked tirelessly for the community. But even they could not explain away the evidence. Closing arguments came on the second day of the trial. Roger stood before Judge Flores and laid it out simply. This was theft, pure and simple. Deborah Kensington had taken my property without permission, based on false information that she herself had created, and had refused to return it even when confronted with proof that I owed nothing. Under Arizona law, I was entitled to 3 times the value of the stolen property, which came to $12,000, plus the actual value of the property, which was $4,000. In total, we were asking for $16,000 in damages. Pritchard argued that the HOA had made an honest mistake, that no harm had been intended, and that I had already gotten my computer back so no lasting damage had been done. He asked the judge to dismiss the case, or at minimum award only minimal damages. Judge Flores did not take long to make her decision. She announced she would issue a ruling from the bench immediately, which Roger later told me was unusual. Judges usually take time to review everything, but Judge Flores had clearly seen enough. "This is one of the clearest cases of theft I have seen in my courtroom," Judge Flores began, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom like a knife. "Miss Kensington, you took Mr. Voss's property without his permission, based on records that you now admit were incorrect. When he confronted you with evidence that he had paid his dues, you refused to return his property. You held a $4,000 computer hostage for months. That is theft." Deborah looked like she might cry. Pritchard put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. "The fact that you did this under the guise of HOA authority makes it worse, not better," Judge Flores continued. "Homeowners associations serve an important function in maintaining communities, but they are not above the law. You cannot simply take people's property because you think they owe you money, especially when they have proof they do not." Judge Flores looked down at her notes, then back up at us. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant will pay Mr. Voss the value of the stolen property, $4,000, plus treble damages under Arizona Revised Statute Section 12691, which comes to $12,000, for a total of $16,000. Additionally, the defendant will pay Mr. Voss's legal fees and court costs." The courtroom erupted in whispers. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Roger squeezed my shoulder. Across the aisle, Deborah buried her face in her hands. "Furthermore," Judge Flores said, raising her voice to quiet the room, "I am ordering the HOA to conduct a full audit of their financial records and to correct any other errors in their ledger. Any homeowners who have been incorrectly marked as delinquent will be notified and compensated for any late fees they paid. Finally, I am recommending that the HOA board consider whether Miss Kensington should continue in her role as president. This behavior is unacceptable. Judge Flores banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I was floating. $16,000, triple damages, just like Roger had said. The news cameras were waiting outside, and Jessica Torres shoved a microphone in my face. Mr. Voss, how do you feel about the judge's decision? I feel vindicated, I said, and I meant it. I hope this sends a message that HOAs cannot just do whatever they want. They have to follow the law like everyone else. The story ran on the evening news again, this time with footage of me leaving the courthouse and a clip of Judge Flores's ruling. The headline read, HOA ordered to pay triple damages for stealing resident's package. It went viral locally, shared thousands of times on social media. The fallout was immediate. 3 days after the trial, the HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Deborah Kensington as president. She resigned from the board entirely the next day. The Phoenix Police Department, having seen the news coverage and reviewed the evidence, opened a criminal investigation into whether Deborah had committed theft under Arizona criminal statutes. While the civil trial was over, she was not out of the woods yet. The other 4 homeowners settled their class action lawsuit quickly after that. The HOA, now led by a new board president, agreed to pay each of them compensation for the stress and inconvenience, though the amounts were smaller than mine since they had not lost any property. More importantly, the HOA agreed to implement new financial controls, including regular audits by an outside accounting firm, and a requirement that 2 board members sign off on any actions taken to collect delinquent dues. As for me, I received a check for $16,000 plus another $8,000 for legal fees and costs. After paying Roger, I still came out well ahead. But honestly, it was never about the money. It was about the principle. Deborah Kensington had thought she could push me around because she had a little bit of power. She had learned the hard way that power comes with responsibility, and abusing it has consequences. 2 months after the trial in March, I ran into Bill, the retiree who had encouraged me to fight. He was out walking his dog and he stopped to shake my hand. "You did good, kid," he said. "Real good. The neighborhood is different now. People are not afraid of the HOA anymore." "They should not have been afraid in the first place," I said. "It is supposed to be a service organization, not a dictatorship." "Well, it is not a dictatorship anymore, thanks to you." I appreciated that, but the truth was, I had just stood up for myself. Anyone could have done the same, they just had to be willing to fight. The criminal investigation into Deborah moved slowly, as these things do. In May, the county attorney's office announced they would be filing charges against her for theft, 5 counts, 1 for each homeowner she had targeted. Each count carried a potential sentence of up to 6 months in jail and fines. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in being lenient. The case had gotten too much publicity, and they wanted to make an example. The criminal trial was scheduled for August, but I did not have to attend. I had already given my testimony in the civil trial, and that transcript was entered into evidence. Roger kept me updated on the proceedings. Deborah's defense strategy was essentially the same as in the civil trial. She had made a mistake. She had not intended to steal anything. She was just a volunteer trying to do her job. But the evidence was overwhelming, and this time she was facing criminal penalties, not just civil damages. In September, nearly a year after she had taken my package, Deborah Kensington pleaded guilty to 5 misdemeanor counts of theft. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, suspended pending 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to all 5 victims. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. I watched the news coverage of her sentencing from my living room, sitting at my custom gaming computer that had started this whole mess. It felt surreal. A year ago, I had been a guy just trying to live my life quietly in my subdivision. Now, I was the guy who had taken down a corrupt HOA president and changed how HOAs operated in the area. But life moved on. The HOA elected a new board that was actually responsive to residents. They started sending out monthly financial reports so everyone could see where their dues were going. They created an appeals process for disputes. They even hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations so that no single person had too much power. It was not perfect, but it was a lot better than before. As for me, I got back to my normal routine. Work, home, the occasional night out with friends. I dated a woman named Beth for a few months, though it did not work out. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a mutt named Cooper who loved to chase rabbits in the backyard. Life was good. But I never forgot what I had learned from the whole experience. I learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when it costs money and time and stress. I learned that institutions and organizations, no matter how official they seem, are just made up of people, and people can be wrong. I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can actually work when you have evidence and a good attorney. And I learned that Deborah Kensington had picked the wrong person to mess with. One evening in October, about 13 months after the whole thing started, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the cooler weather when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, clearly looking at houses in the neighborhood. They walked up to the house across the street that had a "for sale" sign in the yard. I watched them for a moment, then stood up and walked over. "Looking to buy?" I asked. The man nodded. "We are considering it." "Nice neighborhood. How do you like living here?" "It is great," I said honestly. "The HOA used to be a problem, but they have really turned things around in the past year. New leadership, much more transparent and responsive." "That is good to hear," the woman said. "We have heard horror stories about HOAs." "Oh, we had our share of drama," I said with a laugh. "But it got sorted out. If you do buy here, just make sure you keep good records of everything. Bank statements, receipts, all of it. And do not be afraid to stand up for yourself if something is not right." They thanked me for the advice and went to look at the house. I walked back to my porch and sat down, scratching Cooper behind the ears. He thumped his tail against the concrete and looked up at me with those trusting brown eyes. "We did good, buddy," I told him. He did not know what I was talking about, of course, but he wagged his tail anyway. The sun was setting over the subdivision, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The houses all looked the same with their beige stucco and terracotta roofs, arranged in their neat rows with their manicured lawns. But I knew now that what happened inside those houses, the lives people lived and the battles they fought, were all different. My battle had been over a package, over principle, over refusing to let someone with a little bit of power push me around. And I had won. I thought about Deborah sometimes, wondered what she was doing with her community service hours, whether she regretted what she had done. I did not hate her. I actually felt a little sorry for her. She had let power go to her head, had convinced herself that she was important, that the rules did not apply to her, and she had paid the price for it. Maybe she learned something from the experience. I hoped she did. As for me, I learned that standing up for yourself is not always easy, but it is always worth it. I learned that documentation is your best friend. I learned that there are good lawyers out there who will fight for you if you have a legitimate case. And I learned that judges, at least some of them, really do care about justice. The trial had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But in the end, justice had prevailed. The law had worked the way it was supposed to. Deborah had taken my property unlawfully, and she had been held accountable, not just in civil court but in criminal court too. She had learned that calling it HOA enforcement does not magically make theft legal. I finished my beer and went inside, Cooper following at my heels. Tomorrow I had work, and next week I had a camping trip planned with some friends. Life went on. But I knew that if I ever faced another situation like this, if anyone ever tried to take advantage of me again, I would not hesitate to fight back. Because I had learned that you do not have to accept being mistreated. You do not have to let people in positions of authority abuse their power. You can fight back. And sometimes, if you are lucky and you have the evidence and you do not give up, you can win. That package, that $4,000 gaming computer, had become a symbol of something bigger. It was not just about the hardware or the money. It was about respect. It was about the principle that your property is yours, and no one has the right to take it from you, no matter what title they hold or what organization they represent. Judge Flores had understood that. She had seen through Deborah's excuses and rationalizations and had called it what it was: theft. And she had applied the law appropriately, awarding triple damages because the law recognized that theft should be punished, that victims should be made whole and then some, to deter others from doing the same thing. The triple damages provision in Arizona law was not just about compensating victims. It was about sending a message. It was about saying that if you steal, if you take what is not yours, you will pay dearly for it. And Deborah had paid $16,000 out of the HOA's funds, which ultimately came from the homeowners' dues. That had been controversial in the neighborhood. Some people thought it was unfair that everyone had to pay for Deborah's mistakes. But the new board had explained that Deborah was an agent of the HOA, acting in her official capacity. So the HOA bore responsibility for her actions. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. The new board had also taken steps to make sure it never happened again. They had implemented checks and balances, transparency measures, and oversight. They had acknowledged that the old system had given one person too much power and too little accountability, and they had fixed it. Sometimes I wondered if I should have just paid the $345 Deborah had demanded, gotten my package back, and then fought over the money later. It would have been easier, faster, less stressful. But then I realized that if I had done that, Deborah would have gotten away with it. She would have kept doing it to other people. The other 4 homeowners might never have come forward. The systemic problems in the HOA would never have been addressed. By standing my ground, by refusing to pay money I did not owe, by fighting back through the legal system, I had not just helped myself. I had helped everyone in the neighborhood. I had exposed corruption and forced reform. That was worth the stress and the expense. And honestly, getting $16,000 plus legal fees did not hurt either. I had used some of the money to take a nice vacation, something I had not done in years. I had gone to Hawaii, spent a week on Maui, snorkeling and hiking and eating fresh poke. It was glorious. Every time I sipped a Mai Tai on the beach, I thought about Deborah sitting in the HOA office, her empire crumbling around her, and I smiled. Was that petty? Maybe, but I was only human. Cooper barked at something outside, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked out the window and saw a delivery truck pulling up to my neighbor's house across the street. The driver hopped out, package in hand, and walked up to the front door. He rang the bell, waited a moment, then set the package down on the porch and left. I watched to make sure no one came along to take it. Old habits die hard. But the package sat there undisturbed until my neighbor came home an hour later and brought it inside. Just like it should be, the neighborhood felt different now. Safer in a way. Not because crime had gone down, but because people felt like they had a voice again. They felt like the HOA worked for them, not the other way around. That was how it was supposed to be. HOAs were supposed to serve the community, to maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules that preserved property values. They were not supposed to be little fiefdoms where petty tyrants could harass residents and steal their property. I thought about writing a book about my experience, or at least a blog post, but I decided against it. The story had already been told through the news coverage and the court documents. Anyone who wanted to learn from it could look it up. And I did not want to become known as that guy who sued his HOA. I was more than that. I was a software engineer, a dog owner, a friend, a son, a person with hobbies and interests and dreams. The lawsuit was a chapter in my life, not the whole story. Still, people in the neighborhood treated me a bit differently after everything. Some looked at me with respect, like I was a hero. Others avoided eye contact, probably afraid I would sue them too if they looked at me wrong. A few older residents seemed to resent me for causing trouble and making the HOA dues go up temporarily to cover the legal fees and damages. I could not win with everyone, and I did not try. The new HOA president, a retired accountant named Marcus Webb, invited me to join the board. He said they could use someone who was not afraid to ask questions and hold people accountable. I politely declined. I had done my part. Now I just wanted to live my life in peace. But I appreciated the offer, and I promised I would stay engaged and attend the monthly meetings when I could. True to my word, I started going to the HOA meetings. They were boring, mostly discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. But I made a point to be there, to be a visible reminder that residents were paying attention. My presence seemed to keep the board on their toes, which was probably a good thing. Life in the Sonoran Hills subdivision settled into a new normal. The scandal faded from people's minds as newer dramas took its place. Someone got divorced. Someone else had a teenager who threw a wild party. The usual suburban stuff. My lawsuit became old news, just another story people told about the crazy neighbor who had taken down the HOA president, but the changes that came from it lasted. The HOA remained transparent and accountable. The financial controls stayed in place. And as far as I knew, no one else had their packages confiscated for dubious reasons. Deborah's actions had been an aberration, a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked. And the system had corrected itself, eventually. I sometimes wondered what Deborah was doing now. She had disappeared from the neighborhood after her sentencing, selling her house and moving away. I heard through the grapevine that she had relocated to Tucson, starting fresh where no one knew her story. I hoped she found peace. I really did. Holding on to anger is exhausting, and I had no desire to carry that burden. My life moved forward in small, unremarkable ways. I got a promotion at work, which came with a nice raise. I renovated my backyard, putting in a new patio and a fire pit. I started dating again, meeting a woman named Sarah who worked as a veterinarian. We took things slow, but it felt promising. Cooper loved her, which I took as a good sign. One Saturday morning, almost a year and a half after the trial, I was out front washing my car when a silver sedan pulled up and parked across the street. A woman got out, middle-aged, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. She hesitated, then walked toward me. My stomach clenched. It was Deborah. She looked different. Thinner, older, tired. The confident, imperious woman who had ruled the HOA was gone, replaced by someone who looked beaten down by life. "Frank," she said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" I put down my sponge and turned off the hose. Cooper, who had been lying in the shade, stood up and trotted over, his tail wagging. He had no memory of Deborah, no sense of the history between us. To him, she was just another person who might pet him. "What do you want, Deborah?" I asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. She looked down at Cooper, who was sniffing her shoes. She reached down and scratched his head absently. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for everything. For taking your package, for the way I treated you, for all the stress I caused. You were right. I was wrong, and I am sorry." I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation or insincerity, but she just looked sad and genuine. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come here after all this time?" "Because my therapist suggested it. Part of my recovery, or whatever you want to call it, making amends to the people I hurt." She gave a bitter laugh. "There is a long list, believe me." "Are you doing okay?" I asked. The question surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise her. Some days are better than others. I am working as a receptionist at a dental office in Tucson. It is humbling after being HOA president and feeling important, but it is honest work and no one there knows who I am or what I did. That helps. She paused. "I lost a lot. My reputation, my home, my friends. I deserved it, I know that, but it still hurts." I did not know what to say to that. Part of me felt vindicated hearing her admit she had deserved the consequences, but another part of me just felt sad for her. She had made terrible choices and paid a terrible price. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "I hope you figure things out, Deborah. I really do." She nodded, her eyes glistening behind her sunglasses. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She gave Cooper one last pat, then turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Closure, maybe. I was not sure. But I felt like a chapter had truly ended. Deborah was no longer the villain in my story or a presence in my life. She was just a person who had made mistakes and was trying to move forward, same as everyone else. I went back to washing my car, and Cooper went back to napping in the shade. Life continued, unremarkable and peaceful, exactly the way I wanted it. Looking back on everything, I could see how the whole situation had changed me. I was more aware now, more careful about my rights and responsibilities. I read contracts before signing them. I kept meticulous records. I did not trust institutions blindly just because they seemed official or legitimate. And I was not afraid to stand up for myself when something was wrong. Those were good lessons to learn, even if they came at a cost. And the cost had been worth it. $16,000, a reformed HOA, a criminal conviction for someone who had abused her power. Justice, in other words. Real, tangible justice. Not every story has a happy ending, but mine did. The bad guy had been held accountable. The system had worked. And I had learned that ordinary people, when pushed far enough, can fight back and win. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the vindication, but the knowledge that I had the power to stand up for myself. That was something no one could take away from me, no matter how many packages they stole or how many false charges they invented. I was Frank Voss, software engineer, dog owner, suburban homeowner. I was just a regular guy living a regular life in Phoenix, Arizona. But when someone tried to take advantage of me, I had fought back. And I had won. That was my story, and I was proud of it.